Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. One thing that I was thinking about, it was interesting me, is this idea of, I know I've mentioned it previously on these things, truth, and objective truth, which a lot of people talk about, um, because it makes arguments easier, because objective truth is meant to be something that is definitive. There's not like subjective, where it's different people's perception, but it seems to be even with objective truth. It seems to be it's also based on how people perceive it or their interpretation of it. I was just thinking, so that explains why we don't, as a species, get anywhere with a lot of things, because there always seems to be a debate or an argument. Even if there is such a thing as objective truth, if there are, well, there must be, but, well, I say that, but, in my mind I'm thinking about water, and water always being level, but obviously you'll get people who are saying, well, that's not always the case, because they talk about, raindrops, yes, which are circular, and then they talk about oceans, which apparently bend according to the blue marble NASA picture. So even that is a sort of grey area, isn't it? It just, I assume it's to do with the way we're taught, or is it something that we just can't get out of, that we have to always, that we can't have a consensus over things. I wonder if we actually had to list, if you've got one person from every so-called country, and you had to list everything that's objectively true, what list would they come out with? Would anyone actually write exactly the same things down, or would everyone write different things? Because if there are things that are objectively true and things that are true per se, like the tree I'm looking at now. Now I say it's a tree, yeah, because that's the English word for tree, for this thing that we call tree. But I'm sure in different languages there's different names for a tree. Yeah, I know that we're all going to say, yeah, we all agree it's a tree, but it's a different translation. But we are giving it different names. And I suppose colours, or I suppose the only problem is people who are colourblind won't be able to do that one, but assuming you don't have anyone that's not colourblind, well, I don't know, because remember that there was that thing on Facebook and YouTube where people were debating over, it was a gold or a blue or black dress. Do you remember that? There was a big argument, and I looked at it and my wife looked at it, and we gave different answers to what colour it was. I mean, colours per se, they don't even exist anyway, aren't they? They're just spectrums of how our light, like when it goes dark, all the colours go. Is to do with the light and how they shine and things. So I don't know, is there actually such a thing as colours? So what I mean is this is the problem. This is why we have so many debates and arguments, and why, as a species, we can't put things down, where we have debates over, flat earth and ball, and because sometimes it's because of people's personalities, that they're too stubborn to see things. It's their trait that they can't help. There are some people that are very open-minded, and if you talk to them and you give them, well, the only thing is with that, I suppose that means you could actually persuade people to believe things, isn't it? If you were very good at persuading, you could like Derren Brown does. Because it would be a lot easier if there were objective truths, or truths per se, if you know what I mean. Because then we could just say, well, this is definitely this, Otherwise, there's always going to be conjecture and perception, I guess it's just one of those things about our species, but maybe it's to do with our training. As children, we're trained maybe a bit too sloppily to, well, I suppose not really, because we're all trained in the same books. We're all given the same books and we're all taught the same things generally. So where does all this debate come from then? If everyone's taught the same thing, well, I suppose maybe it's where you get other schools of thoughts, other different people coming from elsewhere and coming up with different ideas. Could it be that? But then most people are taught the same thing. I don't know. Am I just rambling? Quite possibly. It just struck me out because I think it was also. I was thinking about it before, but Robert Matthews left a comment on one of my podcasts, the Share one, and he was saying that he disagrees with a lot that I said, but that we came to the same conclusion, and then he listed some really good points. And that just made me think that how, with my mind, I'm thinking that what I said was I was just talking about factual things, although I probably did threw a few examples in there that could be questionable, but that's what interested me, how you can have two people and you can have different views of the same issues. But then I guess if you look at the way, like when you get witness statements, you can have three people witness a car accident and all three of them will give you a different, slightly variation of events, even though they witnessed exactly the same thing. So is a failing in us then, isn't it? But the problem is this failing left unchecked is what causes us to wander off into subjective things and not realising that they're not objective. Or maybe there is no real such thing as as concrete as objective when we think of it as like 100% fact. It just seems to me that there's a lot of as grey areas in all of these things that we look into, and that's why us as a species we can't move on because everyone has a different opinion of the same thing. It's like you get an event like with with say Brexit or with Donald Trump or whatever. You'll get these different opinions. Some people will say, yeah, I like him. Some people say, no, I won't. Or maybe that's freedom. That's freedom of thought, freedom of expression. But then how do we get consensus if that's the way our minds work? But I guess we do agree with certain things, isn't it? Well, it's funny how we're very easy to agree on we're all going to work for money. Despite it being not really that beneficial for us as a species, because, well, money, it tends to help those who have more of it rather than those that don't. But anyway, I don't know. It just came to my mind. I just thought I'd share it with you. It was just making me think about how difficult it is to convince people of, like when you have a conversation with someone about things and everyone has a different perspective, even though everyone believes in the same foundation, as it were. They have the same types of objectives, but they can use them in different ways. I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's what I'm trying to say. I hope it does make sense, and that it makes us think a little bit more. But it explains why, when you have conversations with people that, despite you've had conversations with a person and you detail what you believe is like factually true. But then I've done that before in the past as well. I've had conversations with people and then I thought, that's true. And then later on I've reflected upon it and thought, well, wait a minute, was what I was saying true or not? Do I really believe in that? And even like down the years, you can have different opinions and then, wait a minute, so was I lying back then or was I just telling my truth at that current time? It's almost fluid, isn't it? That it can... But how can it change? But therefore, I guess it's changing, it's just my perception of it or knowledge of it. But yet the problem is when I and other people are arguing, we argue on the basis that what we're saying is correct, No one's going to say, yeah, I argue, but I argue rubbish and incorrect things. We all believe that when we argue with each other, or have conversations, or whatever you want to call it, we all believe at that time that we are actually correct in what we're saying. Though a lot of it, when you actually listen to it, if you actually had to write down a conversation and then actually prove the points that you make, we probably have difficulties doing that, because a lot, as a species, we do that a lot. We hear something, someone else say something, or watch something on television, and we quote it, and if you actually had to prove it, it'd be very difficult. It's like you get people, in the flat Earth ball argument, when they'll talk about gravity, and they'll say it exists and whatever, and if you ask them to prove it, they wouldn't actually be able to prove it, because no one's been able to prove it per se, have they really? There's working arguments to it, but it's interesting how we will argue with things that we can't prove. Maybe that's the problem as well with us as a species, that we waste a lot of time by having these kinds of arguments, that we should really only have arguments that we actually know, almost 100% of what we're talking about is actually factually accurate or true. But then, like I say, we all believe that we do that anyway. Which is leading me to believe that the possibility that I'm just thinking, how can everyone, if there is such a thing as truth, if say the Earth is flat, like I believe, or at least, I know flat is not a popular term these days, but what I mean, it's not round, let's put it that way, like the blue marble NASA picture, then how does everyone get to find that truth? But then I guess most people believe in it to be a ball, but that's because they were shown it. Well, actually, it's because of authority, isn't it? That's why people believe it, because schools and governments and media, they have that authority that the individual doesn't have unless they're connected to those things. But it has to be a respected authority, isn't it? Because if I was on television or at school and I said, no, the Earth is flat, I still wouldn't get believed. It has to be within the consensus of what the majority of respected, trusted authorities believe. So if I stood up and said, yes, the Earth is a ball, everyone would, yes, they would believe me. They wouldn't question it. If I stood up and, I could be the same, like say I was a teacher, and if I pulled the party line, as it were, everyone would believe me. But the minute I stepped out and said something different, so it's not just authority, it's also the consensus of authority of what everyone else believes at that time. That's why you have issues, if you look at, say, homosexuality, if you had someone come out and talk about it on television, say in the 1950s, the majority of people would not be happy with what that person was saying. But since the 70s and 80s, with it being introduced in television programs and made normal, that, as it were, now when you talk about it, it's that person wouldn't get the same reaction. It's the same with the more you introduce it to people. So maybe that's the importance of Flat Earth on YouTube, and that's why it's growing, because the more people are talking about it, the more it's becoming accepted. Like if it's like now, well, I suppose maybe that's why, if you think about it in Coronation Street and things like that, and Big Brother, the more programs it gets in, the more it will be normalised, as it were, and therefore it will, it then has got the stamp of, you're not going to be seen as crazy for talking about it. But it just worries me that the way that the human species works, we could spend years, decades, millennia not knowing things just because we only believe in what authorities tell us, not, like with our own eyes. Because I know that I did, for all these years, whether I'm right or wrong, I had these views. I've had lots of different views. I never considered the fact that we're all really, well, I did write poems about it, but not to the same extent that I do now, that we're all one species and all this black, white is all just man-made construction, and it's just a way to label us and box us and pit us against each other. It's a useless label, and I don't know, the more I think about all these things, the more I have a negative view to us as a species, that we waste a lot of time. We do, like when I was talking the other day about sitting in front of the television, I know I enjoy it. Oh my goodness, I've watched so much television, all sorts of programs, and I still do it. But if you think about it on a grander scheme of things, I must admit myself, even though I do enjoy watching television, it is a waste, isn't it? Because, well, I suppose it is cultivating my mind to a certain extent, depending on what programs you watch, that it is making me think things. I know, I've had, a lot of my basis for my thoughts is based on watching, Doctor Who or Quatermass in the Pit, or X-Files, or, all these different programs that have given me a different way of looking at things, an alternative way. So it's not same with books, But when you look at it, and a lot of it is just passing time, wasting time. Where shouldn't we be doing something more productive? Do you know what I mean? If we all gave up, if there was a way, if all of us gave up an hour of television, the things that we all could do for this species, for this place that we walk upon. There's just so much wrong with it, that's the thing. Whether you believe in flat earth or globe, or whether you actually believe in the fact that, that we're one species or not, or whether you want to believe in, your loyalty to your country, despite the historical nature of it. And that's what made me laugh, actually, before I go on to the next point, is that I was watching, it was the 100-year commemoration, or whatever they call it, of the end of the First World War, and they were putting down the poppy flower things. They had the royals there, of course, putting them down, and the politicians, and then they had the Commonwealth countries come there. And that made me think, wait a minute. So the whole point of like First World and Second World War was, to stop countries taking over other countries and oppressing them and all this kind of stuff. That good versus bad story that we all know about, that is in every movie, that kind of thing. So, and yet, wait a minute, so these Commonwealth countries, how did they become Commonwealth countries? Let's actually look at the history of those things. Like Africa and India and Australia. How did they become? Oh yes, white men, predominantly British, went to their country and took it and claimed it as their and gave it to their monarch. And then those people became subject to that monarch and had to pay tax. And some of the indigenous people were wiped out, exterminated. We do know, I like that the BBC did this Rhodes documentary, and I know it got a lot of flack at the time, and I didn't really understand why, but now I do, obviously. And I liked it because I like Martin Shaw, because he used to be in The Professionals. But I liked the story side of it, how it was written, that it showed it from a boy to a man, how he was corrupted. Because when he started Cecil Rhodes, he would seem like a nice guy. I mean, obviously this is fiction, so how much of it's true I don't know. But he seemed like a nice guy until he went to public school, private school, Eton or Oxford or Cambridge or wherever it is he went, and that's when he was told about, getting things for Britain. That's when they changed him and he became different. But that it interested me in that subject about South Africa and this, that, and the other, Southern Africa. But he stole the land from them. He tricked the kings, into signing contracts, not realizing that they're giving away their land so that he could get diamonds and gold and take it back and make money. And that's, and there was fighting and wars and people got killed and all sorts of things. That's just like, but the real history is worse than that. If you look at what happened to the Aboriginal people, if you look at what happened to the indigenous people of Americas, the whole of their country now, they're foreigners to their own country, of the ones that are left alive that weren't murdered, and the babies. So the Commonwealth is littered with a bloody story of how Britain kidnapped other people's land and took it from them. Yeah, they may have taught them English, they may have taught them Christianity, religions and languages that are not even their own, but they just made them like them. They are created in their own image so that they could be, subservient. But it just seemed very distasteful that when you're talking about war, that you then bring people that are part of the Commonwealth, and I know that they use that term to sort of make out that, because they've tried to rechange it, isn't it? So it's just like, oh, it's a beneficial thing now. It's, wait a minute, have you apologised for all the things you did to these countries, all the people that died? Are the actions that Britain committed under pre-Victoria and when we stole all this land and made all these commonwealths and owned 3/4 of the world, were we any better than Germany, any better than Hitler, our empire? And yet there they were, putting flowers down. I just don't know how people didn't see that. That's why it's very important to know history. Otherwise you forget that and you think, and it's only the history they teach you. Hate Germans, well, not hate Germans per se, but just remember that it was the First and Second World War. That's all you need to remember. First and Second World War. Over and over again in every single school. I'm sure even my twins, when they go to school, they won't be taught about the injustices of Iraq and Afghanistan, where this country had an illegal war and did regime change. No, they won't be teaching them that, will they? Because that looks bad on us, doesn't it? What they'll be teaching them is about other people's wars, where we went to help them, to liberate them, like the First and the Second World War. That's what they'll be teaching them over and over again. But they won't teach them about how we brutally killed people, millions, more than Hitler ever did in our days as the British Empire, because that would be said like, oh, well, that was back then, we're much better now. And then people will say how British people, they're all this, that and the other. Come on, know your history, yeah? Don't think we're any better than anyone else. The blood that runs through on our hands. Anyway, I think that's enough to end it on. I know I was going somewhere else with that, but I've forgotten what it was. But I think I've made the point that I wanted to make. How it's important how we see things and to know things, and how I just feel that it's because of this way of teaching things and perception of things. I think it's going to be very difficult for a future where we have the things that we really all need, the justice and the equalness that we're all born with, and that's denied from us through the way that we live. Take care, take it easy. God bless and peace.